Welcome back. In a moment, we'll examine the challenges facing the Catholic Church. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. An American judge has rejected a request to stop construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Native American leaders say it will contaminate drinking water and damage sacred burial sites. The Obama administration blocked the scheme, but that was overturned by Donald Trump. Gambia's new president, Adama Barrow, says it will rejoin the Commonwealth, a group of 52 nations with Queen Elizabeth II at its head. Gambia left in 2013, with former leader Yahya Jammeh calling it a neo-colonial institution. Scientists have detected what they describe as extraordinary levels of pollution in the most remote place on the planet. Small crustaceans were captured in the Mariana Trench, 10 kilometers under the sea. They were contaminated with toxic chemicals that were banned in the 1970s, but don't break down in the environment. In the first part of the programme, we looked at the Catholic Church in Ireland. Now let's look at the state of the broader faith. Despite all its challenges, it remains the largest Christian church on the planet. Ty Genwright has the facts and the figures.
The Vatican's latest statistics say there were 1.27 billion baptised Catholics as of 2016. That's nearly 18% of the world's population, although it does not necessarily mean those people practice the religion. 40% live in Europe, although this proportion has been falling over the past decade. The growth in Catholicism in Europe has slowed to 2%. The strongest growth is in Africa, where the number of Catholics grew by 41%. In Asia, growth was recorded at 20%. Pope Francis has enjoyed a surge in popularity since he assumed the highest role in the Catholic Church in 2013. One opinion poll by Gallup last year said he was more popular than any other world leader. He's been praised for paying attention to poverty and his crackdown on financial mismanagement within the Vatican. He's been portrayed as more progressive on moral issues than other popes, although his position on the use of condoms, abortion, gay marriage and female priests has remained the same.
Sull'ordinazione delle donne nella Chiesa Cattolica l'ultima parola è chiara, è stata data da San Giovanni Paolo II e questa rimane. Questo rimane. Se leggiamo bene la dichiarazione fatta da San Giovanni Paolo II, va in quella linea.
The history of child abuse within the Catholic Church continues to erode people's trust. This month, a government investigation into abuse in Australia found that nearly 4,500 children were abused in more than 1,000 institutions over the course of 30 years. One whistleblowing priest told investigators, "One of the massive holes in the Roman Catholic Church's approach to this issue today is a failure to completely comprehend the spiritual damage that's done to victims, to their families and the community itself." Pope Francis said he's worried about what he called the hemorrhage of priests and nuns across the world, with the numbers significantly declining over the past few decades. The fall has been at its most dramatic in Europe, where applicants for the priesthood have fallen by 32%. Around the world, the number seeking to become priests has fallen by 17%.
And still with me in the studio today is Maria Power, who's a lecturer in religion and peace building at the University of Liverpool, and Harry Farley, a journalist from the UK's largest online Christian news provider, Christian Today. Harry, there's a conundrum at the heart of this, in that we have a pope living in relative prosperity in the Vatican, with all its secrecy and apparently pots of money, and a church that's growing in popularity where there is no money, where the populations are largely very poor.
Yeah, that's right. You see across Christian churches more broadly, as well as in the Catholic Church, thriving in areas such as China, such as the Global South, and in parts of East Asia, and it declining in Europe and the West, in the more affluent Europe and the West. And that is that is a pattern that has actually repeated itself throughout religious history, that the church doesn't always struggle in areas where there is poverty. It often thrives there.
Why is that divide then? Can faith and religion only survive if you don't have much to live for? Once you become affluent, once you become well off, you become independent of any god?
I think that there's kind of two issues there. I think that the first thing I'd like to point out is that Pope Francis has actually made a very strong stand on the palatial nature of the Vatican by living in the convent and trying to live kind of more simply.
Yes, he criticised many of the aspects of life there, didn't he?
Indeed.
He swapped the Mercedes for a Ford car and things like that.
Indeed.
But nevertheless, you take my point.
Yes,
it is
I
still
do.
a very
I
rich
do.
part of the world.
It is indeed, and I think that that analysis is probably correct, and I think a lot of that has to do with the teachings of the Church. If we look at the teachings on poverty and simplicity and solidarity that the Church is now promoting more since we've had the Francis Factor, these appeal more to people in the Global South and more to people in oppressed areas because there's a stronger message and it links in more clearly to their everyday experiences. Someone living in London would not be experiencing poverty in the same way as somebody living in Latin America. So the message wouldn't come across as clearly. And also, the messages are being given out in two very different ways in the Global North and the Global South. In the Global North, the Church is obsessed with sex, to put it bluntly. That's all the debate's about. That's what the culture war is about. Whereas in the Global South, the message of the gospel comes through much clearly. The actual teachings upon which Jesus and Peter founded the church are actually coming through very strongly. And that's what people are kind of reaching out to.
Just to pick up on Maria's point then, that the Global North is obsessed with matters sexual. Is it because of the teachings of the Catholic faith in particular appear to be so restrictive to a more liberal, a more younger society that wants its freedoms?
Yeah, I think that's right. They are more restrictive. The Catholic Church still insists that marriage is between one man and one woman, but I think there is also a failure in leadership there to take the attention away from the issue of sex, which is bad publicity for the Church.
Well, how do they do that, Harry?
Well, to focus, I think, the Church on issues of poverty where they are strong, where they have a stronger message, I think, and I think that's what you see people like the Archbishop of Canterbury and Pope Francis trying to wrestle the debate away from issues of sex, which just go round in circles and produce negative stories for the Church, and onto their stronger points, which are issues of poverty. The
Church has shot itself in the foot, hasn't it, Mario? When forgive me for mentioning it, but because it's another sexual topic, but the abuse scandal has surely done perhaps irreparable harm when a faith is trying to be good to one another, and yet its very proponents have done the opposite.
And I think that's where Francis's leadership might actually work in this area. He's the first church leader that I've certainly seen in my lifetime that's actually taking hold of this scandal and trying to do something and actually saying that it's a scandal, actually saying that it is evil and wrong what has happened. The way in which, say, for example, the church in this country dealt with it was just morally wrong. And I personally think the church needs to apologise quite publicly and start to deal with these issues very, very strongly.
It wasn't just in the UK, was it? It was around the world. We know Australasia and all these kind of places. America had its problems with these kind of people in powerful senior positions, positions of leadership, Harry, actually doing harm, often to young people in their care.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the church has been hit hard by a general mistrust in institutions, and we see that across institutions, including the BBC and loads of others, but in particular, because it has emerged that so much abuse has gone on behind closed doors, and then when that has emerged, it has then become apparent that the church has sought to bury it and cover it up, and that
which is another sin, presumably.
Which I think
sin upon sin, isn't it?
That is what is so unforgivable, is that that instead of when it is emerged they confess it, they bury it, and move parish priests so they avoid the allegations, and I think that is what people see as so unforgivable.
Is there a global divide, do you see, as you alluded to, in terms of the Global South has one attitude to religion, to faith, and perhaps hears the Catholic message and is responding to it, and the Global North, and therefore there's almost two churches needed?
I would still say that we still need one church because it is, after all, the universal Catholic Church. But I would argue that we in the North need to learn from the South, because the laity in the global South are much more vocal and much more involved in their church. They don't, they take ownership of the church with the leadership. The way in which the Catholic Church is meant to work since the 1960s, it's not meant to be a hierarchical institution. We are all meant to be equal within the church, but the laity need to kind of step forward and take responsibility and try and move the debate away from the moral issues towards the kind of the social and justice issues that are so important. And I think in a way that's been a failure of the church in the global North, that the laity have been so focused on these moral issues and in a way have damaged the other teachings of the church by not allowing them to come to the fore.
And does that represent an existential threat to the church and the Catholic Church in particular, Harry, do you think?
Yes, definitely. I think the church cannot rest on its laurels and assume that this legacy, this sort of vast legacy of moral and ethical authority is simply going to last. It won't. And the church needs to face up to that reality.
Catholicism instills good habits in the sense of, I think, of all the religions, it has the most returnees, at least once a year, perhaps, to go along. So if you're born into the Catholic faith, you know, once a Catholic, always a Catholic, you think that's still true?
Yes, I would say we have a joke that you don't retire, you're just resting from being a Catholic. And I think that's very true. Say, for example, in Northern Ireland, it's very ingrained in you. And it's something you feel in your gut more than anything. Okay. And it is something you turn to for the big occasions in your life, like marriage and death.
Maria Power and Harry Farley, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you. We end with our Insight Bite. This is a little something that we feel you should know. And we're talking today about YouTube's most famous star, who's got himself into trouble for things he's posted on YouTube. PewDiePie has been dropped by Maker Studios. That's a Disney company, after Wall Street Journal found 9 clips that included apparently anti-Semitic or Nazi-related content. Not exactly ideal Disney material. One of the videos involved paying 2 men to hold up a sign saying, "Death to all Jews." Well, the star, whose real name is Felix Kjellberg, says he was trying to show how people would do anything for money online. Maker Studios said that although PewDiePie has made his name by being provocative, these clips went too far. Goes to show that you have to be careful what you do when 53 million people are watching. That's all from me for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.